Hey, it's Jeff Gibbons, and in this video, I'm going to show you some music theory basics that I think every machine user should know. I have another video that goes over the same ideas in Cubase, which might apply to some more traditional DAWs, but this one is going to be how it applies to Maschine. I think music theory is an essential thing that everybody should know about if you're making music. You can make music without knowing theory, but theory doesn't take the magic out of music. And so understanding some of these basics I think is super important. So let's just get right into some of the rhythm basics. Now I'll just make a blank pattern here, and we'll see that the pattern is 4 bars long. Let's make it 2 bars long. And while we're on the topic of bars, I think that's a great place to start. So bars are the fundamental building block of music, and the way you need to think about it is a bar is a container of time. We can split that bar up into portions. And so if we take the bar and we divide it into quarters, we get 4 beats. A beat equals a quarter note. So that's a really important concept right off the bat. Quarter notes equals beats. When we say 2 beats later, it means 2 quarter notes later. And then we can divide the bar further. So if we look right here at this grid, we can see bar 1 and bar 2. And we can see the different beats in that bar. So each beat equals a quarter note. So if I go down here and set my grid to a quarter note, we see that the grid changes to quarter notes. Of course, with eighth notes, we're dividing that bar into eighths. So there are 8 eighth notes in each bar. So here we've got 8 eighth notes that happen in the first bar and 8 eighth notes that happen in the second bar. And if I change the grid to sixteenths, it will become 16th notes. So here's another cool little key command to remember. The number keys correspond to these grid settings. So if I press 1, the snap will change to a bar. If I set 2, it'll be half notes. 3 is quarter notes. 4 is eighth notes. 5 is sixteenths, and so on and so forth, all the way down to the 8. And then if you get to the 0, what the 0 does is it turns the grid on or off. And that's going to become useful. Let's put this back to eighth notes for a second. I press the 4 key. And if I press the E key, by the way, it turns into a pencil. So I press the E key to turn into a pencil, and I can start drawing in some notes, because I just want to draw some in to show you. And the 0 key, by the way, check this out. If this little grid button is on right now, if it is on and I am back to my arrow tool, I press the E key again. If I'm back to my arrow tool and I try to move notes around, this is something called snap. And snap right now is restricting where these notes go. And right now they're restricted to eighth notes. So if I want to maybe move this a little bit with more precision, I'd press the 5 key on my keyboard or change this to a 16th so I can move the kick drum over 1/16th note. So let's just have a listen here. All right, let's just change this pattern to 1 bar, by the way. So we have quarter notes that you have 4 quarter notes in each bar. We've got half notes, which would look something like this. If I had, say, a half note on a different sound here, I'll press the 2 key to go to half note down in the grid. And if I draw in half notes now, we see that they take up half the bar. Here's another zoom shortcut, is if you go down to the bottom here, you can drag up to zoom in or drag down to zoom out. So let's just make this nice and big. All right, there we go. So now we can see our 1 bar, and I can see my half notes taking up half of the bar. If I set the grid to whole notes, so 1 bar, you'll see that I will only be able to draw in a note. If I press the E key, that is a whole bar long. So that's it. Whole notes, half notes, quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, 32nd notes, 64th notes, and so on. So once you get into that, you're into the glitch territory. So it's probably useful to know if you want to get into glitch stuff, take it down to a 64th or 128th note, and that's when you're really going to get that resolution where you can do some stuttery, glitchy kind of things. One more thing, if I go over to a note, let's take this bass drum right here, and if I have the snap on and I have the snap set to, say, 16ths, I can click on this note and only move it to 16ths. Understand that with the snap setting, I can turn that grid off. So I can click the 0 key on the keyboard and the grid turns off. And now I can move the notes freely. There's another way to do it. If I turn the grid back on, and the note is snapped to a grid, what I can do is press Command on a Mac and drag it left or right, and I believe it is Control on a PC. Hit Control and it will allow you to click and drag the note and move it wherever you want. It temporarily disables the grid for that moment. Okay, so before I go too much farther, understand that we are working in a song that is 4/4. So if I look up in the top, I see that my time signature is 4/4, and what that means is 4 quarter notes per bar. So for each container, that bar container, we have 4 beats. And where things get a little bit strange is you can have a bar that only has 3 beats in it. So 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So we still call them quarter notes, even though they're not really taking up a quarter of a bar, which is a little strange. But time signature in 3/4, we call that is 3 quarter notes in each bar, or 3 beats. And then if we want to split that further, of course, we could have 6/8 notes in a bar of 3/4 time. Right? So it gets a little bit weird. A 3/4 song would be something like a waltz, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then you can also have something called 6/8 time. And 6/8 time would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And again, the different way of making music, most people doing hip hop type beats and pop music type beats on Maschine are probably going to be sticking to 4/4. But if you want to get into some Dilla type stuff, you need to know about other time signatures as well. So you can change the time signature to all sorts of different things here up at the top. So we could have something like 5/4. There's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, it kind of makes pop music, hip hop music a little bit more exciting when you try different time signatures, you know, and still have some kind of beat that you can groove to. That's enough about time signatures. We'll leave the basic time signature set to 4/4. And then of course up top we have the beats per minute. While we're talking about beats, what I can do is just tell you a little bit about how to make a basic drum beat. For like the most standard kind of drum beat you could ever make, you would have a kick on 1 and 3. So you can see beat 3 right there. And then a snare on beats 2 and 4. So I'm going to hold Option and drag that over, and there's our basic drum beat. It's a little bit faster. It's Billie Jean. Here we go. All right, so 1 and 3, kick drum. 2 and 4, snare drum. How do we make this a little bit more interesting? Maybe add some hi-hats. So let's go to hi-hats, and we'll press the key command of 4 for 8th notes, and I'll go to my closed hi-hats and draw in some hi-hats. So I'll just go like that. And then of course, if we did 16th notes, it would sound like this. Let's press 5 to change the grid to 16th notes. Select all of these and then E and draw them out. There we go. Understanding the 16th note, 8th note, quarter note sort of relationship becomes really important when we get into quantizing. And quantizing is what we do when we want to fix the rhythm of something we have played. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play the original beat in and then show you what quantizing is all about. Okay, so there's a beat played in, and we can see that my timing wasn't perfect. So let's have a look here. We've got this kick drum a little bit early, this snare drum a little bit early, right? This one's just the only one that's a little bit late. So what we can do with quantizing is we can push these notes all exactly to the grid. So I can take every single note and push them to a grid. Now the problem with quantizing is sometimes if your grid is set too fine, like let's just say I played this note something like that, and it was supposed to happen right on beat 2, but I played it somewhere over here. The problem with quantizing that some people don't understand right off the bat is that if you have the quantize set to a 16th value, like we do with our grid down here, let me turn that back on, then this note, when I press quantize, it's going to get pushed to the wrong line. I meant for it to happen on beat 2, but it's closer to this 16th note a little bit earlier. So watch what happens if I press quantize. Now I can press quantize by pressing shift quantize on the machine itself, and it'll quantize. I can undo that. Or I can quantize on the keyboard with Option Q or Alt Q on a PC, and it'll quantize the notes over. And you see that this one went to the wrong spot. So sometimes when you quantize, things get pushed the wrong way. But other than that, you see that all the notes get pushed exactly to a grid. And that's where things like quantizing 50% come in really handy, is when you want to quantize something to the grid, but you don't want it to be too robotic. So you can actually do a percentage closer and just kind of tidies things up. So let me undo the quantize here. And let's try quantizing 50% on the controller. It's Shift Pad 6, and you see that everything moves 50% closer. So not exactly on the beat, but just a little bit. Quantize 50% closer. This is still going the wrong way, by the way, but we'll fix that in a second. And on the keyboard, it's Shift, Option, and Q. So that's how we move things 50% closer. And the cool thing about that is you can do it a couple times. So if I do it again, 50% closer, now technically you're moving things like 75% closer to where they should be, and you keep going like that until maybe you get it completely quantized. But anyways, let's just quantize this completely. We'll fix this note by just grabbing it and moving it over to where it is supposed to be. So just be aware of that. If you play some more complex stuff, you could have some notes that are moving to the wrong spot on the grid. And don't forget, this applies especially if you've played something that doesn't have 16th notes in it. It actually just has 8th notes. Then you can set your grid to a bigger resolution, so an 8th note instead of a 16th note. And if there weren't any 16th notes in the stuff that you just played, don't bother quantizing to 16th notes. You're going to make it way harder for yourself. Just set it to 8th notes, quantize everything. Everything will more likely get pushed to the right spot. So really important to understand this quantizing relationship. And the only thing you can really do to find that out is to take the information you've got, set your quantize value to something like an 8th note, quantize it, and see if there's mistakes all over the place, if it's moved things the wrong way. And if it has, try setting it to a quarter note and see if that sounds better. Watch what happens if I set the quantize to a quarter note, by the way. Press 3 on the keyboard and Option Q. It moves everything onto the beat. It's going to sound like this. So just on the beat. So of course we want to set our quantize. We'll set it back to 16th notes. So we'll undo that. Okay, so let's have a listen. So just try the different quantize settings out, undo them, try a finer resolution or a bigger resolution, and see what happens with your notes. If you're playing something really simple like a pad that's only changing on quarter notes, don't leave your quantize resolution set to 8th note or 16th note. Set it to quarter notes, press quantize. Now your pad's going to start exactly on the beat, which is what you want, right? When you're playing something more complex, set it to 8th note. And if it starts moving notes all to the wrong spot, try a 16th note, and then go in and adjust things by hand if things are on the wrong spot. That, I think, is enough for the basic quantize settings. And then the last thing I want to talk about with rhythm is probably the most confusing thing on Maschine, and that is the swing settings. And swing just means that when you have a beat that goes dot, 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 if we do what's called a straight beat, a straight swing setting, in other words, no swing, the notes in between the beats are going to go like this. Dot, 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 dot. And with that, we can hear these perfect 8th notes in between our quarter notes. If we set a swing to a full swing setting, it's going to sound like this. Dot, 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 dot. I was thinking of it kind of like skipping. Dot, 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 dot. And so what we do with the swing on 16th notes is we push the E and the and of what I was just saying. So 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1 E and a 2. So dot, 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 dot. Straight would be dot, 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 dot. So let's draw in some 16th hi-hats so we can really hear this. Press the E button, drag out some 16th hi-hats, and let's have a listen. This is straight. One E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a. That's what we actually say for 16th notes. I didn't quite mention that. But 1 E and a. So we want to get the E and the I guess. 1 E and a. So we want the E and the to be a little bit later. So if we were to go really slow, we want like you're skipping. So what I need to do in Maschine is go up to this global swing setting here, and let's set it to 50% swing. Let's have a listen to that. So we can hear every other hi-hat note is coming late, as if it's skipping. If I set this to 25% swing, now we are going to get a little bit less. It's almost a little bit back to straight. Let's go back to straight for a second. 0. And we want so I press the swing back to 25%. We get this. Feels a little bit funky, right? Starting to get kind of groovy. 25 is a great setting for kind of middle of the road. Set it to 50, we get. Now, 50% swing sounds exactly like full 100% swing on other programs like Cubase. And a full swing, if you want to get really technical and talk about something we haven't talked about, a full swing would get to the point where that late note, that the skipping sort of note, that note is actually lining up with a triplet. So we go to a 16th note triplet, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw in a note like this, tut 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 tut, like that, all the way through. So what happens if you set it to 75% swing or 100% swing? Well, weird stuff starts to happen. So I usually keep it 50% and under, usually somewhere around 25, depending on the song. It all depends on the song. Every song. Sometimes you just have it at 0. I'll show you another song in a second. I sort of made it up at 0%, but I can add some swing and see how it feels. So let's set the swing to 75% for a second and see what happens. .75% swing is called a dotted rhythm, where if it was an 8th note, it's adding another 8th note plus a half of that, which is a 16th note. Anyways, we'll try this out at 100% swing. Let's see what that sounds like. It sounds like now the 16th notes, these in-between notes here, are just getting pushed right to the next line. So I don't know why I'd ever want to use 100%. And by the way, if you click this master button and click the channel button on the machine controller, or just click this button up in the software and click over where it says groove, or on the controller you set the groove to right there, groove. We see 3 controls, and with those we get to change the swing with a little bit more precision. So right now we can see that the swing setting is at 100%, which corresponds to up here. If I change one or the other, changes on the other spot. And there is a way to invert the swing. You can check that out in the manual. I personally have no idea when I would ever want to do that. I can also change the cycle. This is where things get also a little bit weird. And what I noticed is if you have a song where your snare drum lines up on beats 2 and 4, like I said, 1, 2, 3, 4, kick, snare, the 8th cycle setting is going to work just fine for you. But I'm going to save this project and show you another project where I did things a little bit differently. So this is my project from my Massive X video that I made just about a week ago. And in this project, I've got my swing set to 0%. So let's see what happens when you press play. So let me just go show you something on this one. Let's listen to the verse here. I am going to solo the drum kit. And the reason I'm going to do that is I want to show you what's happening here on this drum kit. Let's have a listen. 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So where my snare lines up in this case is on beat 3 of every bar. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Under this groove menu here, if I have it set to an 8th note and I start cranking up the swing, watch what happens. Nothing. What I need to do there is change my swing cycle to a quarter note. Now watch what happens when I press play and start playing with the swing setting. You see that now the swing is working. And do you remember what I told you before? When it was set to eighth note, it seemed like 50% swing was doing 100% in other programs. But what I've found is if you're in this quarter cycle for your swing setting, you can set your swing all the way to 100%. It's not going to sound stuttery like that other one. So let's have a listen to that. That's probably the dotted rhythm I was talking about to the music theory gurus out there. But if I set this to 75%, this is where it starts to feel proper to me. So if your swing settings aren't working at that eighth note cycle, then what you should go try is set your cycle to a quarter note. And if you're going to be on the quarter note cycle, just be aware that 75% swing is going to be the full triple-E kind of swing that we're used to as 100% in a program like Cubase. And then something like 50% or 30 or 40% is going to be just a portion. Maybe it's going to be closer to 50% in a program like Cubase. Those are the conclusions I've come to. So again, set your swing to eighth note, and if it works for you, great. You can adjust things up to 50%, and then up to 75% starts to get pretty ugly. But if you set it to this quarter cycle, then you want to set it to 50 or 75% or even farther if you want to get that really shuffled sort of beat. And what I'm going to do is show you the whole song now, what it sounds like with the swing setting on. I've got it on the quarter cycle, and let's have a listen. So 75% swing sounds pretty awesome on this tune. I would probably leave it at something like 55. Let's go with that. That sounds great. So we'll leave that there. So go check out my other videos. I've got videos with me working with other artists. I've got some videos where I do some creative sounds with Maschine and other programs. Check out those songs and hit the subscribe button and the bell. And thanks for watching.